There's a certain kind of monster that doesn't hide in the shadows. He smiles at you in a bookstore. He carries your groceries. He tells himself that he's the hero of the story, even when every trail of blood leads right back to him. Today, we're walking through every city, every obsession, every lie Joe Goldberg ever told, starting from the moment he spotted a girl in a window and convinced himself it was destiny. This is the entire story of You, summarized in 26 minutes. Season 1 begins with a simple idea that becomes terrifying fast. A bookstore manager named Joe Goldberg sees an aspiring writer named Guinevere Beck and decides she's meant for him. Not, "I'd like to get to know her," not, "maybe we should talk." Joe jumps straight to fate. And when Joe believes something is fate, he'll twist the world into whatever shape he needs. He starts small, peering through windows, following her through the city, learning every detail she doesn't even know she's giving away. For him, stalking isn't evil. It's research. Preparation for the perfect love story he's writing in his head. But stories need obstacles, and Beck has one immediately. Her rich, entitled, on-again, off-again boyfriend, Benji. In Joe's mind, Benji isn't a person. He's a barrier. And barriers get removed. One kidnapping and a basement glass cage later, Joe convinces himself that killing Benji is not only necessary, it's merciful. Once Benji is out of the way, Joe slides into Beck's life like it was always meant to happen. But Beck's best friend, Peach, sees right through him. Peach isn't just protective, she's obsessed with Beck in her own way, clinging to her, manipulating her, trying to keep Joe out. And Joe? He's convinced the world is testing him, forcing him to prove his love through darker and darker choices. When Joe ambushes Peach with a rock, it feels like the end, until she survives and invites Beck to her family estate to recover. Peach tries to whisk Beck off to Paris, but Beck finally realizes just how controlling Peach is. She leaves the estate, giving Joe the opening he thinks fate intended. He kills Peach and stages it as a suicide, believing the universe is finally clearing a path for him and Beck. But the problem with pretending to be the perfect boyfriend is that perfection always cracks. Beck grows distant, secretive. Joe becomes suspicious, paranoid. He starts seeing her therapist under a fake name just to figure out if Beck's cheating. Eventually, their trust collapses, and Beck walks away. But neither of them stays gone for long. Joe tries dating someone else, Karen, a steady, kind woman who actually treats him right. But Joe can't let go of Beck, the fantasy version he built in his head. And Beck can't let go of Joe either. They fall back together, thinking this time they'll get it right. But Karen's parting words hang in the air. Joe will never stop pining for an ex. Those words send Beck digging. She uncovers Joe's past with a woman named Candace, an ex who vanished after their breakup. And when Beck finds Joe's hidden box of trophies, phones, trinkets, even teeth, every truth spills out. Joe responds the only way Joe knows how. He cages Beck in the bookstore basement. Beck writes her way out, literally. She types a confession blaming Joe's crimes on her therapist, Dr. Nikki. And for a moment, it works. She manipulates Joe into believing she understands him, even loves him. She gets him into the cage. She almost escapes. But one locked basement door and one traumatized kid later. Beck's story ends the same way all of Joe's romances do, tragically. Months pass. Beck's unfinished book became a national sensation. Dr. Nikki is arrested. Joe is free. Everything should be perfect. And then Candace walks through the bookstore door, very much alive, and very ready to make Joe's life hell. If you're hooked so far, hit subscribe so you don't miss the rest of Joe's twisted story. Now let's get into Season 2. Season 2 starts with Joe running, not from justice, but from Candace. She knows exactly who he is, what he's done, and she wants revenge. So Joe flees New York, steals a man's identity, and lands in Los Angeles, telling himself he's going to be different this time. Healthier, safer, no more cages, no more killing. But Joe trying to be a better person is like a wolf trying to be vegetarian. Hunger always wins. He gets a job at a grocery store called Anavrin, and that's where he meets her, Love Quinn. A woman who doesn't need chasing, manipulating, or rescuing. She runs toward him from day one. It's the first time love comes pre-packaged for Joe without the stalking phase. But the smoother things go, the faster Joe spirals. If love comes too easy, he can't trust it. Love's twin brother 40 drags Joe into his own chaotic world of screenwriting dreams and failing ambition. Joe pretends to play along while silently plotting how to stay invisible. And just when he thinks he's avoiding his old habits, a teenager named Ellie wanders into his life, the kind of kid Joe always feels responsible for, the kind of dynamic that always pulls him back into the darker corners of himself. When Ellie lands an internship with comedian Henderson, her sister Delilah warns Joe that Henderson has a secret history of abusing girls. Joe goes into protector mode, storming Henderson's house to confront him. The argument escalates and ends with Henderson tumbling down a staircase to his death. And suddenly, Joe is right back where he started, a man with blood on his hands who believes he had no choice. Delilah figures out Joe's involved and starts digging, forcing Joe to lock her in the vault temporarily until he can disappear from L.A. forever. But when he returns the next day, Delilah is dead, her throat slashed. And then Candace shows up. She traps Joe in the vault and calls Love, determined to expose him. But this story isn't done twisting. Love arrives, looks at Joe, looks at Candace, and kills Candace herself. That's the moment everything flips. Love confesses that she too has killed before. The au pair who hurt 40, Love murdered her as a teenager. Delilah, who threatened Joe's freedom, Love slit her throat to protect him. Love tells Joe she was always watching him, always studying him, always shaping herself into what he needed. They aren't a perfect match. They're mirror images. Joe is horrified. For the first time, he is the one trapped by someone else's darkness. He wants to run. He wants to kill her. But then Love reveals she's pregnant. Joe doesn't fall in love again. He chooses it. For the baby, for the fantasy of a normal family, for the idea that maybe he deserves a fresh start after all the bodies he's buried. 40 doesn't buy it. He tries to kill Joe and is shot by a cop who mistakes him for the eat-the-rich killer. The Quinn family cleans up the entire mess, frames 40 for everything, and sends Joe and Love off to a quiet suburban neighborhood to start their perfect life. Except Joe doesn't know how to do perfect. He's already staring through the fence at the woman next door, imagining the next story he's about to write. Season 3 opens with Joe trying something he's never actually attempted before. Being normal, being domestic, being a dad. He and Love move into picture-perfect Madre Linda, surrounded by tech millionaires, mommy bloggers, and neighbors who alphabetize their vitamins. Joe tells himself he'll be a better husband, a better father, a better man. But if there's one thing we've learned, it's that Joe Goldberg can't outrun himself, not even in the suburbs. The moment he sees Natalie Engler, his married neighbor, Joe feels that old spark, that same dangerous mix of curiosity and fantasy that always ends in tragedy. And while Joe tries to resist, Love feels the shift. She's been watching Joe long enough to know that look in his eyes, and when Love senses Joe pulling away, well, she does exactly what Love Quinn does. She kills Natalie. Joe helps bury the body, literally, because he's trapped in a marriage where both partners believe murder is just a slightly aggressive form of conflict resolution. They fake smiles for the neighborhood, host dinners, bake desserts, and pretend to be the perfect couple while hiding a corpse and trying not to kill each other. Then Joe meets Marianne, the town librarian. She's a recovering addict, a single mom, and dangerously for Joe, someone who actually sees through people. Marianne isn't a fantasy projection like Beck or Love. She's grounded, flawed, real. And that makes Joe's obsession 10 times worse. The more she opens up about her custody battle with her ex-husband Ryan, the more Joe convinces himself that killing Ryan would be justice. And when Ryan catches Joe spying on him, Joe proves once again he only has one setting: permanent solutions. Meanwhile, Love tries to stabilize her own life. She opens a bakery and builds another glass cage beneath it because nothing says family business like a basement prison. At the same time, she becomes friends with influencer Sherry Conrad and her husband Carrie. That friendship quickly mutates into something Joe wasn't expecting. Sherry and Carrie invite them into a swinger situation. Joe says yes because he wants an escape route from his marriage. Love says yes because she wants to keep Joe close. And in the middle of all the awkwardness and jealousy, the Conrads overhear too much and end up locked in Love's plexiglass box. The Conrads, being the Conrads, turn captivity into couples therapy. While Joe chases Marianne, Love finds her own distraction with Theo, the sweet, overly romantic college kid next door. Theo happens to be the stepson of Matthew Engler, Natalie's widowed husband, who is now obsessively investigating her death. When Theo discovers video footage of Joe driving Natalie's car, he rushes to warn Love and walks straight into the Conrads' basement prison. Love knocks him out, Joe rescues him, and the mess just keeps getting bigger. Eventually, Love confronts Joe about Marianne. She finally sees that her husband never loved her the same way she loved him. Joe, exhausted from the cycle, asks for a divorce, something Love cannot accept. And when Love cannot accept something, people die. She paralyzes Joe with aconite, planning to kill him before he runs off with Marianne. But Joe proves he's always one step ahead. He took an antidote. He kills Love instead, stages her as a deranged murderer, and burns their house down with her inside. He leaves their baby Henry with Dante, a kind co-worker, believing Henry deserves a life free from all this blood and chaos. As Madre Linda reels from the destruction, Joe boards a plane to Europe. A new name, a new city, a new obsession. He's off to find Marianne, and he's convinced this time he'll get it right. Season 4 throws Joe into London under the name Jonathan Moore, hiding from the world, hiding from the law, and trying to convince himself he didn't just murder his wife and abandon his son. He tells himself he's here for one reason: Marianne. When he finally tracks her down, she's terrified, horrified, done with him forever. Joe swears he'll walk away and let her live in peace. And then a hitman appears. Elliot, hired by Love's father, is supposed to kill Joe. Instead, he offers Joe a deal: hand over the money he stole and kill the only loose end, Marianne. Joe can't do it. He fakes her death by stealing her necklace and gives Elliot what he wants. Suddenly, Joe is free, armed with a new identity and, in his mind, a clean slate. All he has to do is behave, which lasts about 5 minutes. Joe gets a job as a university professor and gets dragged into the orbit of London's wealthy elite through Malcolm Harding, his obnoxious co-worker. Malcolm's girlfriend, Kate Galvin, is sharp, suspicious, and impossible for Joe to manipulate, which naturally makes her irresistible to him. At a party filled with rich narcissists, Joe meets Lady Phoebe, American rich kid Adam Pratt, and an author named Reese Montrose, someone Joe actually admires. They talk about pain, poverty, and second chances. For once, Joe thinks he's found a kindred spirit. Then Malcolm turns up dead in Joe's apartment. Joe thinks he killed him during a blackout. But when someone texts Joe saying, "Thanks for cleaning up my mess," the nightmare becomes bigger. Someone else is killing people and framing Joe. The public quickly names the mystery figure the Eat the Rich Killer, especially after another wealthy victim, Simon Sue, is found dead, an ear missing, echoing Malcolm's missing finger. Kate grows closer to Joe, even as she suspects something is deeply wrong with him. Adam's bodyguard Vic becomes convinced Joe is Malcolm's killer. When Vic confronts him, Joe is forced, again, to defend himself in the only way he knows: permanently. Meanwhile, the mysterious killer keeps texting Joe, demanding that he murder Kate next. Joe refuses, but the noose tightens as he becomes the prime suspect. Phoebe invites the group to her family estate for a weekend, which turns into a disaster. Gemma ends up dead. Roald chases Joe through the woods with a shotgun, and just when Joe thinks he's done for, the real killer reveals himself. It's Reese Montrose, or so Joe believes. Reese locks Joe and Roald in a dungeon, sets the room on fire, and walks away. Joe escapes, determined to take Reese down before he can hurt Kate or anyone else. But as Reese announces his run for mayor of London, Joe realizes taking him down won't be easy. To make matters worse, Nadia, one of Joe's students, begins investigating him and uncovers disturbing clues. The killer continues pushing Joe to find someone innocent to frame for all the murders. Joe reluctantly chooses a woman named Dawn to pin the crimes on, and when that works, Reese gives Joe one final task: kill Kate's powerful father, Tom Lockwood. Lockwood arrives in London, trying to drag Kate back into the family empire she hates. Then he flips the board, revealing he knows exactly who Joe really is. That he knows Joe murdered his own daughter Love, and he wants Joe to kill Reese for him. This is when everything snaps. Joe tracks Reese to his countryside home and tortures him for answers, only to learn the truth. The real Reese Montrose has never met Joe in his life. Every conversation, every threat, every order was all in Joe's head. Joe Goldberg has been hallucinating a darker version of Reese, his own murderous instincts given a face and a voice. Joe himself kidnapped Marianne. Joe kept her locked up. Joe killed everyone. Joe staged the evidence. Joe had a psychotic break and built Reese as the devil whispering in his ear. And suddenly, everything makes sense in the worst possible way. Nadia discovers Marianne trapped in Joe's new glass cage. She promises to help her escape, unaware of how far Joe is already slipping. Joe tries to live normally, dating Kate, convincing the world he's harmless. Meanwhile, Phoebe is manipulated by Adam, who uses her wealth to cover his debts. Lockwood has Adam killed when Phoebe refuses to listen, pushing Kate closer to Joe and further into her father's shadow. Joe is haunted by the ghosts of every woman he's destroyed. Beck, Love, Candace, Delilah, Natalie. Every name he tried to bury claws its way back into his mind. Joe decides the only way out is to free Marianne and then kill himself. He finds her dead from an overdose, except Joe doesn't know Nadia helped her fake it. Marianne and her daughter escape to Paris, finally free. Joe attempts to jump from a bridge over the Thames, but he survives. Kate inherits her father's empire and wipes Joe's record clean, presenting him to the world as a victim of Love Quinn's rampage. Joe takes this power, this status, this new beginning, and embraces the monster inside him completely. He kills Nadia's boyfriend Edward. He frames Nadia for the murder, and he returns to New York with Kate, all of his sins washed clean by privilege and money. But underneath the polished new life, one truth sits like a heartbeat. Joe Goldberg is just getting started. Season 5 opens with something we haven't seen in a long time. Joe thinks he's finally safe. He's back in New York, back where the whole nightmare started. But now he's wealthy, protected, and married to Kate, one of the most powerful women on the planet. He has influence, he has immunity, he has money, he has his son Henry back. For once, Joe really believes he's untouchable. But the thing about Joe Goldberg is that he can lie to anyone, except himself. His past creeps into the edges of his mind like mold under wallpaper. Instead of dealing with it, he does the thing he always does. He writes. He hides away in his old apartment above the bookstore and pours every murderous thought, every violent fantasy, every impulse he can't control into a manuscript. Kate finds it, and instead of running, she reads. She processes. She decides that Bob, her uncle, and the only person threatening to expose Kate's past involvement in her father's crimes, needs to go. Not in court, not with lawyers, but permanently. Kate asks Joe to kill him, and Joe, trying to be the husband she deserves, does exactly that. He makes it look like a clean suicide and covers up every trace. But in doing so, he unlocks something he spent years trying to bury. Joe gets the taste for killing Beck. Then the real chaos begins. Kate's twin sisters, Maddie and Reagan, enter the picture. Reagan is sharp, calculating, and ruthless. Maddie is timid and lost in her sister's shadow. Together, they're a walking trap. Reagan hates Joe. Joe hates being threatened. And when Reagan finds out that Bob didn't just die, he was helped along, she vows to tear Joe and Kate apart. But Joe gets to her first. Or so he thinks. He sneaks into Reagan's office at night to kill her, only to discover he has the wrong twin. He's kidnapped Maddie, the gentle one, the insecure one, the one Reagan used as a surrogate to birth her own child. And the second Maddie realizes Joe sees her as a mistake, something shifts. She stops being afraid. She starts wanting revenge. Joe keeps her locked in a basement plexiglass cube, the same pattern he swears he'll never repeat. But Maddie doesn't break down. She opens up. She confesses every way Reagan controlled her, every humiliation, every betrayal, and Joe does what he always does. He convinces her he's the solution. Maddie impersonates her sister. She attends board meetings in Reagan's place. She gives Kate an ultimatum. She tears apart her sister's life from the inside out. She even kills Reagan when Joe demands it. Maddie walks into the world wearing her sister's face while the real Reagan's body goes missing. Meanwhile, Kate starts realizing her husband isn't the misunderstood victim she fell for. The pieces don't add up. Too many people around Joe conveniently die. She hires detectives. They dig deeper than Joe expects. She learns the truth. Joe killed Love. Joe killed Malcolm and the London elites. Joe killed every woman he claimed to save. And he's cheating on her. Yes, Bronte. The girl Joe met in his bookstore, shy, sweet, overlooked, desperate for shelter and belonging. She's the only one who looks at Joe the way Joe wants to be seen. When he protects her from her abusive ex Clayton, she sees a hero. But Bronte has secrets too. She's Beck's friend. She's part of a small group obsessed with finding proof that Joe killed Beck years ago. Clayton is actually the son of Dr. Nicky, the therapist Joe framed for Beck's murder. Their group wanted to expose Joe, but Bronte fell for him instead, convinced he was innocent. Clayton refused to drop the mission, manipulated the situation to get Joe to attack Bronte in a jealous rage, and ended up getting himself killed in the process. Bronte lies to the cops, saying Joe killed Clayton in self-defense, but she disappears afterward, terrified of what she knows Joe is capable of. Joe panics and tracks her down. They reunite for one fragile night, both desperate, both broken, but Joe's lies keep crumbling. Kate steals Henry away, cutting Joe off completely. Joe spirals. Online misogynists started targeting Bronte after Clayton's death. One tries to kidnap her. Joe kills the man to protect her. But when he takes Bronte to his basement and reveals the prisoner he's captured, she sees the truth she's been avoiding. Joe isn't a misunderstood protector. He's a killer who chooses violence over and over again, whether you ask for it or not. Bronte releases the prisoner, hoping Joe will change. Joe kills him anyway. And Kate, realizing she helped unleash a monster, goes to London to meet Nadia in prison. The same Nadia who tried to expose Joe last season and ended up framed for murder. Kate wants to undo the damage. Nadia wants justice. And Maddie wants revenge on the man who built the plan that destroyed her entire life. Together, they form a plan. Joe doesn't know that when he frames Harrison, Maddie's former brother-in-law, for Reagan's death, or when he tries to kill Kate so he can disappear with Bronte, or when he wakes up trapped in a plexiglass cube, finally on the other side of his own nightmare. Kate, Bronte, Nadia, Marianne, they all stand against him. Every woman he's ever wronged is suddenly staring back at the monster he's become. Joe tells Kate everything, all the murders, all the lies, all the manipulations, and Kate records his confession. She sends it to Nadia, who uses it to get Maddie freed. Maddie lights the bookstore on fire as Kate collapses bleeding. Bronte finds Kate unconscious and despite everything tries to save her. Joe escapes with Bronte, thinking he found love at last. He thinks he's safe. He thinks he's starting over, but Bronte only saved him to finish the mission Beck never could. She lures Joe into a house, holds him at gunpoint, and demands he confess on tape. She wants the truth, every word. Joe fights her, they crash into a lake, and Bronte sinks beneath the surface. Joe swims away injured, believing she's gone. But Bronte survives. Joe gets arrested within hours after killing a police officer to escape. The world finally sees him not as a victim, not as a misunderstood romantic, but as the predator he always was. Kate resigns. Marianne raises her daughter in peace. Maddie builds a new life. Nadia becomes a writer and advocates for the wrongfully imprisoned. Bronte republishes Beck's book and becomes an advocate for women harmed by men like Joe. And Joe? Joe Goldberg is sentenced to life in prison. He sits alone in solitary confinement, reading fan mail from strangers who romanticize him. A cage he can't escape. A story that finally ends where it should have begun. That's the story. 5 seasons of obsession, lies, and the countless people who never walked away. Which moment shocked you the most? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more deep dives into the wildest series on television, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss the next recap.